Okay, hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webinar, Gauging the Impact of Personalized Learning. My name is Kevin Hogan. I'm the editor-at-large for eSchool News, and I'm happy you are joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. This event is brought to you by Stride. Since 2000, Stride Learning Solutions has been a leader in strategic solutions to solve district challenges. Their flexible online and blended learning options boost modern instruction and promote lifelong student success. With an innovative platform, comprehensive digital courseware, adaptable technology, and extensive support, Stride is equipped to help your school or district empower a brighter future for learners. Before we start our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to go over some features of the platform that we're using for this webinar. The event is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with the PDF of the slides. Also, there is a chat function that you can launch by clicking on it. Feel free to use this feature to contact someone from eSchool News if you have a technical question, but also if you have questions or ideas that you want to share with the panelists that would help in the conversation, please do so. So with these housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with the conversation. You know, the idea of personalized learning is more critical than ever to help students recover lost learning and get socially emotional growth. Personalized learning also helps educators who are in dire needs of solutions during this wild time. And while advances in EdTech have helped make personalized learning techniques more efficient, scalable, and achievable for educators over the past decade, many strategies were forced to take a back seat, understandably, to the more pressing challenges during this pandemic. However, the folks we have on our panel today, I know will be able to help the folks in the audience who have maybe, depending on what level of understanding they have with personalized learning or the techniques that they're using, to take those to the next level. Just a quick introduction of each of our panelists. I'll start with Dr. Daggett. Bill Daggett is the founder of Successful Practices Network and the International Center for Leadership in Education. He is he's recognized worldwide for his proven ability to move pre-K to 12 education systems towards a more rigorous and relevant skills and knowledge for all students. For 30 years, he has crisscrossed our nation to lead school reform efforts to effectively prepare students for their future. Also with us, Nayoka McCoy. Nayoka is the Senior Vice President and Chief Academic Officer for Stride. As Chief Academic Officer, she uses her ingenuity to drive education equity, provides support in building strong academic programs, and continues to focus on developing teachers and leaders across the world to be effective in the online learning environment. It is her goal to create a platform that opens the doors to high quality professional development for teachers and leaders in any school setting. And last but certainly not least, Phil Emer. Phil is the principal of AWS K-12 vertical team. Phil has also spent over 30 years working at the intersections of information technology, research, academia, and business, splitting time between the public and private sectors. He currently serves as a principal with the AWS K-12 vertical team. He comes to us from the Friday Institute, where he spent 13 years planning, designing, and implementing technology programs, including the North Carolina School Connectivity Initiative, the North Carolina Education Cloud, the NC Digital Learning Plan, and the School Business Systems Modernization Program. So as you can see, we have some veterans here who not only have worked in this space for a long number of years, but have really been deep in influencing it and creating it. So I thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned, as with everything else that's happening during the pandemic, the importance of personalized learning has never been more pronounced. Really, I want to just kind of start the conversation off, and maybe Bill, I'll put you in the hot seat first. Talk a little bit about how you have seen this idea, this phrase, personalized learning, be transformed over the past couple of years versus the decades in which you've been working on it before.
personalized learning isn't new. It's been around forever, but we never effectively did it. Because our system is still set up very much on an industrial factory model, a teacher, large group of kids. And the reality of it is most educators liked school when they were kids. So they went to college to major in school, so that when they graduate from college, they could return to school to do to others what had been done to them. And so suddenly say, oh, well, now we want you to have a whole different delivery system and personalize it. It's difficult for them. They haven't seen it. And so what we know with the advancing technologies, however, and we knew this pre-COVID, that there were more and more tools and strategies in Stride. Naoki can tell us a whole lot about that. Phil can. Stride was really effective at developing them. But what happened during the pandemic is the gap with any group of students we have has grown almost exponentially. Because the increase in learning that occurred during the pandemic has been very, very uneven. And so if I'm a teacher with a group of kids today, in front of me is an enormous variation in their skills, their aptitudes, their experiences. And if we think that old industrial model will work, I think we're sadly mistaken. And so my advice all the time to educators is don't think about after the pandemic getting back to where we were. Use it as an opportunity to get to where we should be, which is clearly personalized learning. And again, I think Stride has taught us a whole lot about how to do that.
Yeah, Naoki, does that resonate with you? I mean, again, I mean, you've been working with these technologies for a long time. And I agree with what Bill says, you know, not only the phrase personalized learning, but also phrases like socially emotional learning. Back BP before the pandemic, and you would go to events and we would talk about these concepts, but there wasn't any sort of real reality to it from my perspective as a journalist to actually see it actually in practice. Whether we liked it or not, as we went into this remote learning setup, they really needed to be applied, right? Talk a little bit about how you saw Stride pivot during this transition.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Bill. I think that personalized learning for some is very difficult. It's difficult to wrap your head around, right? So you have students in your classroom that are at various paces or various stages of their proficiency, and we have to figure out how to address all needs, right? So it's not a one size fits all. And so I think one of the things that's very key for us is training and professional development. So we have to make sure that those teachers are ready. They have a toolkit to be able to deliver that type of learning. And especially as Bill said, if they're not comfortable, they're used to the, teacher in front of you kind of just teaching directly at you and hoping that you actually digest that information and can regurgitate it at some point, right? So we have to make sure that they are actually moving to a different level of competency and that the teachers are ready to take them there. So as a teacher, I have to also be ready to pivot at any point in time during my lesson and also observe my students. So you talk a little bit about social emotional learning. That has to be the foundation of your classroom. We have to be able to read the room. I think it was the Pew Center that did a survey, and 96% of the students said that one or more of their peers experienced depression or anxiety. And so if we keep that in mind as a classroom teacher or as a school leader, we know we need to make sure that we have resources and things in place to be able to support our students and our teachers to overcome those obstacles. Students can't do the tasks that are in front of them if they're overwhelmed and frustrated and have all of this anxiety surrounding them. We have to give them a safe space to be able to, have an outlet to explain and kind of talk through some of those things that they're going through. And the teacher has to be able to have that time to be able to listen. And so I think that's all a part of this personalized journey that we're on. And so developing teachers and making sure they're ready to do that is going to be key.
Yeah. And Phil, from your experience over these past 18, 20 months, it seems like 18, 20 years. How has your work different? How much more essential has the concepts of not only personalized learning, but social emotional learning been applied?
Thanks. Good questions. So from AWS's perspective, I'd say when we look at everything, we're looking at a service now, right? So it used to be, classrooms, teachers, cafeterias. Now everything is delivered as a service. Content is delivered as a service. Learning is delivered as a service. Instruction is delivered as a service. And we've seen that it's now not, it used to be kind of an innovative, cool thing to do one-to-one learning, or maybe to have a more robust digital learning environment. And now it just is, right? It is learning. The other thing that we really see is, or at least certainly that I see, is there's this new web of connections between people, data, and content. And so a lot of it used to be in more siloed areas, and now they all sort of intermingle, right? And so this affects a lot of things. It affects, some very technical things about how do we get that data into that learning management system so we can do personalized learning, right? Or into that content management system, or into that learning platform, because that data is important to sort of help the progression. Those kinds of things are super important, but it's also organizationally important how the groups inside a school district interact with each other, where they're used to perhaps being more independent and they've collaborated. Well, now those collaborations are very different, and now they're kind of ground up. And then just reach matters much more. So just with school districts now having to be substantially concerned and in effect leaders in things like community broadband, which years ago was a interesting conversation a little bit. It was seen as sort of economic development is what drove the growth of broadband places, and now it's learning and education that's really driving it as a driver of innovation and economic development itself. And so those are sort of the key things that I see. The last thing I'll leave you with is the sort of reliability of the system at large. And so I will never forget maybe 30 years ago when I was working at university, and one of my mentors said to me, we're trying to do digital learning, but when I'm in a classroom, at the front of a classroom, and I'm working on the chalkboard, and my chalk breaks, I have 2 pieces of chalk. And here, right, if I'm a teacher in an online learning environment or a student in an online learning environment, there are lots of things that can break. And having to adapt to that is very different, right, than being at the front of that classroom. And so there are lots of things that we're doing, obviously structurally, operationally, and technically to deal with that.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, we're still in this space where we need to talk about education within the context of what I call now DP during the pandemic, right? I mean, it's still something that we're slogging through. So many districts are virtual now or in some sort of hybrid situation. But each of you just brought up several different positive aspects. I mean, not that we don't ever wish a pandemic upon anyone, but I think that there is some very positive takeaways that a lot of innovative districts and educators are taking from this. As Bill, to what you said, is like to not go back to whatever normal was. Nayoka, I want to go a little bit deeper when you were talking about the mental health and the mental health of students back in the spring of 2020. It really seemed all it was for the districts to get reconnected with the students. State testing went out the window. The idea of particular curriculums went out the window, but it's really trying to put students in, as you mentioned, like a safe space before you can actually do any education. Talk a little bit about how that maybe change some of the mission of Stride.
Definitely. I think, as we move to, during the pandemic, of trying to figure out, one, how do we hold students accountable? How do we look at assessing students? I think that we really put a lot of our time and effort into adaptive testing to make sure that students can actually do it on their own. We're really working to train teachers on how to do that as well, and how helping districts find tools that work for their students. I think for us, we've had that in mind before because we've been doing this for a long time. I think back to when I started with the company in 2007, you know, it was a weird thing to say, I'm an online teacher. Everybody was like, what are you doing? Like, what does that mean? And so I think, you know, just trying to help everybody understand that we've been doing this for a while and we've come up with a lot of different strategies that actually work, and sharing those strategies with districts and teachers and trying to help them understand that the pandemic doesn't have to be like the end all be all, right? It's showing you some new things that you can do, new ways to use technology in the classroom, and just helping districts and schools really get to from point A to point B. As Bill said, kind of thinking about more futuristic thinking. What is it going to look like in the classroom? How do we bring gamification into the classroom? So having those conversations about what next steps are and how that will look, I think is the approach that we've taken as we're trying to help and be a partner with schools and districts to help them get to the next steps.
Yeah, and Bill, maybe you can go into a little bit more in depth on what you believe are some of the top strategic initiatives for districts when it comes to bringing these best practice of personalized learning into the classroom, or into the classroom as well as into the home, or whatever that hybrid model may be going forward.
Yeah, I think actually Phil described them when he said, you know, the new dynamics is people, data, and content. Because if you're going to personalize instruction, you've got to have very, very good data. And the reality of it is most districts don't have that. And what we're trying to do in most districts is make what we need to do in the past fit the system we have in place, rather than building a system that meets today's needs. And so you'll find often places like charter schools are doing really well. I think that's one of the reasons Stride has done well. You didn't have to reconstruct a system. You built a system, Phil, around the issue of people, data, content. And when you do that and understand it, it fundamentally changes the role of the teacher from being the one who is delivering instruction to more managing student learning, student by student. And again, data becomes really, really central to that. And that's what I chair this National Commission for AASA, which was created in partnership with the National School Boards and the National Governors Association. 27 national leaders from across the country, CEOs of 5 tech companies, heads of the 5 largest foundations, 12 of the nation's most respected superintendents. Commission met every other week for 8 months to say, what do we do post-pandemic? And one of the central recommendations was the need to personalize instruction. The term we use is to let students become co-authors of their learning journey. Now, if you really think about that, student as a co-author of their learning journey, that's quite different than the 20th century system, which decided how long everybody would take each course every day, every year. Was anything but co-authoring. To do that, it starts out with this whole issue of relationship. So to personalize instruction, you've got to get to know the kids. You've got to know the kids. Then you got to figure out what's relevant to them. To use instructional practices personalized to them to actually cover the same content all the kids have. So the content doesn't change, the instructional practices change. To have that work, the commission then identified 115 school districts nationwide that are trying to do that. And we've networked them together and beginning to learn a lot of the important messages. And I go back to Phil's comment about people, data, content, right on the money. But I do think Stride, your job is tough as chief academic officer. So don't be offended, but you have an easier job than the chief academic officer of a school system that is trying to force 21st century solutions into a 20th century system. You're trying to develop 21st century solutions in a system designed for the 21st century. It's a fundamental difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And Phil, you know, when we talk about implementing these platforms and these systems into places, and I think it was Bill who was mentioning maybe charter schools. I mean, you can have individual schools, and then you can have the Los Angeles school district with 750,000 students, right? Or Chicago or New York, who are all struggling right now in this current situation. And it's a question I've always had when we talk about these sort of platforms, even before the pandemic, and it's a question of scale. Again, it's a great idea for a fourth grade teacher who has 50 students to know each one of those individually, but how do you actually truly implement personalized learning? Now, the tools here, I think we found, can work to make that happen. But maybe from your experience, talk a little bit more about how these sort of concepts can be scaled to especially when you're looking at public school systems and districts around the country.
Sure. So when I think of scaling, I think of, sustainability, right? How do we sustain performance? How do we sustain reliability? How do we sustain access? Those kinds of things. And so, and I think about, if you took out the words, digital learning or online learning and just said, how do you sustain learning, right? What do we have to do that? Well, now what are the new things we have to layer on, right, to be able to sustain and scale? So the good news is technically, AWS is an elastic, large, scalable, cloud IT environment. So we know how to scale storage. We know how to scale compute power as usage grows, and we know how to do that. It gets more complicated, right, as you get closer to the user, because now we have to worry about, there's a device, and those devices change over time, right? And there's an operating system, and there's a web browser, and there's an EdTech platform, and there's a learning platform, and all of those things are not static, right? They're changing. And so that means that also that the decision makers in school districts have now kind of 1,000 more decisions to make, right? And so they have to decide, do I want to standardize on a single platform? Do I want to standardize on a single learning management system? Do I want to standardize on multiple content providers? How am I going to deploy and integrate standards so that when I pluck one out or put one in, it's sort of pluggable? But even the standards are changing pretty significantly and rapidly, right? And so when I think about sustainability, this is what we got to get our arms around. Now, I think IMS Global has done a really nice job, and a lot of school districts have really embraced, and edtechs have embraced some of those standards, particularly on the content side. We now have, a handful of standards on the data side with Ed.D, with the U.S. Department of Ed's Common Education Data Standard. And still hanging in there is CIF from a couple of decades ago. But we, all of those things, need more operational sort of depth, right? So places where we had a person, maybe at a Department of Ed, or a handful of people across school districts, these are now new staff choices, right? There needs to be operational, new operating entities, right? And as Bill pointed out, I'll go back to data. Data is super duper important. And look, we can personalize shopping really well at Amazon, right? We do that very, very well. And the tools, the machine learning that's behind it, we certainly can adapt that and use that for learning and for teaching. We absolutely can, and a lot of our EdTech partners are in fact doing that. But what we need is sort of data as a culture, right? And that needs to sort of flow from top to bottom inside of school districts. And I think that I'm seeing that happen more. We're seeing, for instance, more school districts hire data scientists. But I think that state legislatures, state departments of ed, really, and colleges of education, right, need to start incorporating these across the whole pipeline. to really be able to ultimately kind of sustain and scale online learning.
And Nayoka, I mean, just as I was mentioning to Phil, the school districts, especially some of the top 10, there's been, again, another kind of concept of digital equity, right? I mean, we would go to Ed.D or you go to TCEA and we talk about this concept. It became a very stark reality, again, during especially the first several months, about the idea of equity and access to technology and the internet, which continues to be a huge barrier for students, teachers, and school districts, especially as the need for these digital solutions rise. What do you believe are the important ingredients opening more doors for equity in our schools? I guess maybe we could start with the Recovery Act monies, maybe.
Definitely. I think that that's going to be exactly what you said, like talking about recovery acts, talking about grant funds, actually really stepping out there and identifying some key partnerships. I can remember watching the stories or hearing the stories about the students that were hovered together outside of a McDonald's to try to get online to do their work, or they're outside of the library, which wasn't even open during the pandemic, to try to get online to be able to do their work. I think that it's going to be important for school leaders and for districts to be creative and think outside the box. When we're in our normal school day, our kids are coming into the building and things are going well. We don't often think about trying to establish a partnership with Verizon or T-Mobile, or really trying to step outside the box with these technology and companies to make partnerships that will help our students get access or gain the access that they need. There were some districts that were very creative. They actually purchased buses and put buses around the districts with mobile hotspots, or they partner with Verizon to set up hotspots in the areas where they need it the most. And I think that is key when you're opening your doors for an online program. Those are the first things that you need to think about, is how do you make sure that all students have access, not only just to the internet, but also to the devices, right? So schools had to use some of that money to purchase devices for students and have them sign them out. But you also need a tech team to test those devices to make sure that they can actually handle whatever you're delivering. So, I can remember Teams, everyone was on Teams and some of the devices didn't really handle that well. And so making sure that you're really thinking through your plan. And I know that we were in an emergency situation and we were really trying to figure it out in the moment. But as we're moving forward and schools are making more strategic decisions of what they're going to do, I would ask that that's a part of your plan, right? So start looking at those partnerships, look at those districts where things have gone well, where they've established these buses around the district and it's working. So start looking at those different options and see how you can bring that into your district to make it a better experience for your students and for your teachers.
Yeah. Bill, I'm wondering if you could go a little bit deeper into your work as chair of the Learning 2025, and talk a little bit about it, especially for folks who might be on the call this afternoon, who have maybe taken the first steps as a result of the past 2 years to get personalized learning and automating these processes in place. But give them a little bit of a prescription of next steps of what they can do to help start to advance that use of personalized learning in their district.
Well, where the commission was, Kevin, versus where the 115 districts that a year later are trying to implement it is somewhat different. Because a year ago, if you go back a year, everybody thought, no way would we be in the 21-22 school year, still in the middle of the pandemic. Okay, so just keep that perspective in mind first.
Sure.
Because culture trumps strategy. And you can't make any changes in a school system until they're any faster than the rate of readiness and trust. And what has happened is we did have the trust issue out there. A lot of people were skeptical. Okay, not everybody's like Nayoka and Phil, loving the technology into it. There are a lot of people, educators, really resisting it. That was a trust issue. But if you sit in the chair of a principal or a superintendent today, forgive me, they're in crisis management. From multiple directions. They got the issues of, do we mask, don't we mask? Do we vaccine, don't we vaccine? What happens in terms of the fact that we don't have enough bus drivers. By the way, problem all over the country. We've got student academic gains that have fallen behind. We have an explosion, as Naoka indicated, in mental health issues. On top of that, what was already a politically polarized nation has become exponentially more polarized during the pandemic. And the epicenter of that is in the schools. And the local school board is being hammered by their constituents. Those parents, that constituent is hammering then the superintendent. We are predicting through AASA that we will lose at least 30% of our school superintendents between now and the beginning of the next school year, if not 40%. They are resigning at an extraordinary rate because the pressures are so terrible. So while I'm a great advocate for everything I'm describing here, and Naoka and Phil are talking about, we have to recognize culture trumps strategy, and the readiness and trust, you've got to gain that first. I use in presentations, I use a fulcrum or a teeter-totter. We're all old enough to remember teeter-totters.
Absolutely.
Okay. And on one side, you got all these daily pressures that I just described. On the other, the commission said 2025, where do we need to get the schools to, which is all kids having personalized learning, using advanced technologies, teachers ready, all those issues. These pressures are so great over here, they can't even think about this too much now.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've discovered is you've got to balance and have a clear vision of where you want to go. And at the same time, focus predominantly on addressing today's challenge. McKinsey and Company is a company that did extensive research for us. 18,000 companies, small, medium, and large, across the country in every industrial sector. And they looked with and coordinated it with the US Department of Labor. And we broke down and all jobs in the country into the 5 quintiles, the lowest 20%, the next 20% in terms of wage, all the way up to the top 20%, and broke them down by 5 skill areas: physical manual skills, basic cognitive skills, higher cognitive skills, SEL skills, and technological skills. And not surprising to anybody, today, as you go from the lower jobs to the better paid jobs, physical manual skills fall way off.
Mm.
But if you really study where the Department of Labor and the major businesses and these 18,000 companies talked, they said that's not so true by 2025. Because the lower wage jobs will be decimated by the advancing technologies. If you can write an algorithm for any task, the job is gone. Okay, and this is a little overly simplistic, but I'm sure you all have iPhones, right? And if you today, if you type in and begin to type an email, you type 4 words, does it give you the next word? And is more times than not, is it correct? Okay, not to get technical here, but that's a GPT-1, basic technology. Siri, Alexa, isn't that extraordinary what it can do? That is GPT-2, okay? Elon Musk is probably leading the investors here. He just put 2 weeks ago another $1 billion into this, but they have multi-billions of dollars invested in GPT-3, which is over 100 times greater capacity than GPT-2, which is like Alexis and Siri. You know what it does? It tracks everything about Phil. If you get the apps, it tracks everything he's doing online. And so when he writes that first sentence of his email and he's putting the subject line who it's to or what it's about, It will write. It's not going to give you a word or two. It's going to give you the entire email. Okay. Now you
And
can
Phil,
go
you're
through
doing
my-
that now, right?
Yeah. Or if you got to do a budget, it's got all your budget data. And you put in 3 or 4 key indicators, it will develop a suggested entire budget with a spreadsheet and all, and report for the Board of Education. Literally apps within a year available to that. Now, why do I tell you all that? Because the skills that you need in this crisis time is, yes, basic skills, but you need strong interpersonal skills. You look at part of the issues with mental health. You need great self-leadership skills. And what the research groups the commission has worked with have defined those interpersonal skills and those self-leadership skills needed for 2025. Because the only thing businesses are going to pay you to do is what the technology can't do. And in your personal life, what you're going to do is what the technology can't do. Technology can't do the interpersonal skills. It can't do the self-leadership skills. Interestingly enough, they are the exact 2 set of skills we need during this crisis time. And so culture trumps strategy. You've got to have the staff understand, your board understand, the community understand that we are solving today's incredible challenges at the same time moving our system towards where we need to go in 2025. Now, there are other skills I won't get into right now that you then add on top of that, but you've got to take that teeter-totter and you got to level it out. That's what we're finding the schools in the country that are really lighting the path for the rest of the country are doing. Sorry to go so long on that question.
No, it's really insightful stuff. And it actually raises a few questions for me. Nayoka, maybe you can address them, especially when it comes to assessing those sort of skills, right? And assessing, putting somehow, well, the title of the webinar, gauging a student's progress. As I mentioned, high stakes testing went out the window in 2020. Another kind of mind-blowing thought is the end of SAT and ACTs when it comes to assessing students, and there's a lot of positives that come along with that. Talk a little bit about the technologies of assessment when it comes to implementing personalized learning in districts.
Yeah, I think that the assessments will differ and vary across the board, but I think that as we're looking at how we should be assessing students, I think at least a lot of people are now moving to pre-test and post-test. A lot of the time we just try to test them after they've learned the content, but really focusing on pre-test, because when you think about personalized learning, you need to know where those students are so you can then develop a plan to try to help them get to the next point, right? So I need to know how to meet you at your current level to be able to, and I need to know what that data looks like for you to be able to create a plan to ensure that you master the skills that are forthcoming in the classroom. But not only that, I think the key about pre-testing and it allows students to make mistakes before they actually dive into the content. And I've seen over the past year that schools and teachers are allowing students to make more mistakes and then using those mistakes as teachable moments. That's still assessing your students. You're allowing them to actually be curious and try to figure things out, whether it's a project that they're starting with or an inquiry-based assignment that they're doing first and foremost before they even get into the actual knowledge they need to know, but allow them to do some research and find things on their own. Is a lot of teachers had to actually shift to that type of learning strategy because of the pandemic, especially if students were online or they're not face-to-face. When you're online, you have access to so many materials. And I think Bill kind of alluded to that. You have internet, you can use different web searches, you have all of these things that you don't have in the physical classroom when a student's right in front of you. And so I think just opening up that door allows students to, one, really find the information and learn things on their own, but it allows the teacher to change how they assess as well. We have the standardized testing. We know that's a thing. We have a unit test. We know that's a thing, but also just testing as the students are going through the process. So checks for understanding, whether you're doing a quick pre-test or a quick in the middle of the session test. And so, you know, when we're in live sessions, you just want to stop for a moment, engage where the students are to make sure that they're one, following along, or everybody's moving in the same direction. They might not be moving at the same pace, but at least they're going in the same direction. I think it's key for teachers to be able to pivot and be able to do that with, you know, in an informal way, but then also to have the formal assessments as well. And you find that a lot of districts and schools are trying to figure out what tests work best, right? So NWA, STAR, we use those tools, but trying to figure out, are they truly predictive of what the student will do on the state assessment, and trying to figure out whether or not it's a true gauge of students' growth. And so I think we also have a lot of districts that are questioning that as well. You know, there's iReady, there's Dibbles, there's a lot of different assessment tools out there. Everybody's trying to figure out what works. But I think as far as a part of personalized learning, having those more informal checks is really what's going to help students grow, because you're working with that student, whether it's a one-on-one or a small group basis, to ensure that they're mastering those competencies.
Yeah. Have a question that came in from the audience for all the panelists. How can we use personalized learning for more career or technical learning opportunities for our students? Bill, you started in to talk about that. Maybe do you have anything to follow up?
Yeah, I recognize that the classroom and the lab is not the only place instruction can happen. Think about the whole concept of apprenticeships and job shadowing. We've got to open up the resources of our communities, and you can do that via technology, okay? Because you can take kids into places that they are not physically actually right there, which enables you to personalize it. And what you got to know is where is that child in terms of their level of proficiency? What's the career area they're going after? And it changes, again, that role of a teacher from demonstrating the skills to managing the learning experience for the kid, which means not only in the classroom, but in the community. Career and tech ed is a natural one. I'll tell you another natural one is anything in the arts, the performing arts and so on. If you think about the good career and tech teachers, if you think about the good coaches, and if you think about the good music and art teachers, their instructional strategies and practices are fundamentally different than most academic teachers. Okay, they're not on the coaches aren't on the field playing the game. They're on the sideline managing. Performance is going on. Their music director isn't singing and using the instruments. They're facilitating. The good career and tech ed teacher isn't telling the kids how to do it. The kids are doing it and they're managing it. So I think the academic teachers can learn a whole lot from the non-academic teachers. Here's our problem. Our 20th century schools have always validated and put the academic teachers on a little bit higher pedestal. What I'm saying is the 21st century, those non-academic teachers may be the ones we should put on the pedestal and learn from.
Yeah, yeah. And Phil, as you've worked in several industries beyond education, you might have an interesting aspect or insights to this question.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I will say that while I was listening to Bill talk about that, I was remembering right out of school, I worked at IBM a long time ago. And a little bit before I started at IBM, IBM was recruiting programmers. And where IBM recruited programmers from, because there were no computer science programs yet at the time, were music majors and math majors. Because they had done enough work, in the 60s to figure out kind of the skill sets and the way, students that were good at music learned and adapted was applicable pretty substantially to programming. And then of course, math was in there too. And so when you get back to this personalized learning and career and technical education and all of that, I feel like we have platforms, as I mentioned earlier, that we can figure out, certainly where I work, at the larger company, kind of what it is that you're going to buy. In fact, we probably already bought your groceries, Kevin. They're waiting for you at home. We figured out already, based on what you talked about. We've already shipped them.
That's
Right.
right.
So it's like we can figure that out. But I think a thing that will be core to the sort of personalized learning, and sort of matching jobs and opportunities with people is this a growing, the sort of individualized learner record, right? The comprehensive learner record, the notion of a digital wallet, and then letting students define their profile, right? Now we can help them, define their profile as we listen, the systems themselves kind of monitoring where you're going. But I think that those kinds of systems are likely to become, we're already seeing them grow. I see a lot of school districts and states starting to invest there. I think that's an important kind of piece of infrastructure in that world.
And Nayoka, talk a little bit about Stride's efforts when it comes to career and technical learning opportunities.
Yeah, so we're putting a lot of effort behind our career and our career tech opportunities. We're really working with different partners and programs to help really create those tools, sort of like what Phil was talking about, that will create that personal shopping experience, where a student can actually go into a platform, do some research on different careers and kind of, do some drop downs and pick what they want and then see exactly what they need to do to get into that career. Sometimes students choose a career, they don't really understand, how do I get there? Like, how many years of college do I actually need, right? Or how many years of a technical school and what type of certification do I need to get there? And so we use tools like Tallo and Nepris to help students, one, connect with experts in the field to be able to get more information, then also to be able to build that type of profile portfolio of some options that they're looking for, and then to be able to tailor their instruction in their courses all towards that career path, right? What are you thinking that you want to do? What are some things that we can do in 2 years? Can you get a certificate in 2 years? So we're trying to also push some accelerated programs for students to be able to, start their sophomore or junior year and actually have a certification in it before they even graduate. And so we're really pushing that effort forward and really trying to make sure that we have the curriculum and courses behind that to really make it kind of just blow up. You know what I mean? So, and we're also helping these districts that need courses or digitized courses, or if there's a career pathway that they don't offer, like a vet tech, and not everybody can offer vet tech, but for us to be able to have that curriculum to be able to offer to that school district to say, hey, you might not have any experts there where you live, but we have some things that we can offer and some support that we can help get your students exactly what they need, so that they don't have to wait beyond high school to get into vet tech. They can start that early on, and then try to also look into some virtual internships and virtual mentoring for students as well, so that we use those platforms to really help navigate that and partner with these companies to help, hey, how can we find these experts and get them to come into the classroom? That's the great thing about being online. Bill can be anywhere, and I can bring him into my classroom to talk to my students about whatever it is that he's doing. And so I think just making sure that they know that that's an opportunity to keep bringing in career experts and all those experts in the field into the classroom to give students an insight into what does it take to do this job and what does it take to get here. So we've really put a lot of effort behind that and make sure that we have the tools in place to be able to support students in that path, going down that path.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be one of these discoveries, or again, and something else before the pandemic we would always talk about in terms of remote teaching and learning, that your French teacher would be in France to the student who's in Idaho. And because of this forced beta test that we've all gone through, it actually kind of can happen, right?
Definitely.
So I have a bunch of questions that are coming in from the audience, which is great. One, I guess, Nayoka, I'll throw this one back at you. What are the indicators that are being observed during personalized teaching that an educator is looking at that's in helping to focus on the right student at the right time? Talk a little bit maybe about the dashboard.
Yeah, so I think, we talked a lot about data. And so I think you're looking at your data. So as you're working with your group of students, looking at data and seeing where your students are and identifying what are those targeted groups or targeted students that you need to really focus on. Depending on your assessment, you might have a scale. You want to look at your bottom quartile, or you want to look at your what we call your bubble or promise kids. What are you looking at? What type of data set that you're looking at that will drive your instructions? It will also drive who you're working with, who you need to spend more time with. And not saying that your entire class doesn't need time, but maybe on that specific skill, you need to dive a little deeper, with Phil or with Kevin, and really spend some more time to make sure they understand that skill, and then trying to figure out how do you navigate that within your classroom. When it comes to personalized learning, it does take a little bit of planning, right? So you need the time to really do your data dive and look at your data. You need to plan that instruction, plan your different groupings that you're going to work with, and what does that instruction look like? And then what are the outcomes? Again, talking about assessment, how are you going to go through all of those informal assessments, those checks for understandings? And then what is the culminating activity that you're going to ensure that those students actually master those skills or competencies, depending on the school and district that you're in?
Well, I knew that the toughest part of my job here would be to end the conversation. There are so many ways that we can go, and there's so many different ways in which personalized learning can be applied. But we are getting close to the top of the hour, and I wanted to give each of our panelists just one more, what I'm hoping is a glass half full sort of answer to the question of what they see going forward. Let's say the next 3 to 5 years, best case scenarios. We're kind of out of this. Bill, you referred to the, not going back to normal. Maybe each of you can kind of give us what you see as your best case scenario for the future of personalized learning as we come out of this and we approach AP after pandemic. And Bill, maybe I'll put you on the hot seat first there.
I think we're going to begin to see the breakdown of some of the rules, regulations, and policies that have hamstrung school districts, parents, and kids within school districts that say, you come to us at the time and place we anoint you to come. And because of the combination of three things, the incredible power of virtual delivery, and the reality that some teachers are really, really good at that, and some are terrible, coupled with a growing sense, and I get this in my discussions with the national commission, with the governors and others, of saying, you know what? Why can't I'm in northern New York State. Tomorrow night, where I live, the wind chill factor is supposed to be 35 below zero. Okay. I think I'd rather be down where Yoka lives. But maybe could I, with my family, spend a few months in the winter in Florida? And I could easily deliver instruction. Why does it have to be average daily attendance that they got to be in the seat? Okay. Also, you talked about career and tech ed. Some districts have got a lot better career and tech ed programs. Okay, you get some stride, some, and I know because I worked a little with Pat Michelle when he was putting some of these programs together. You got some incredibly powerful CTE programs that school districts across this country, especially smaller school districts, have no capacity to offer their kids. So why can't they take that CTE program from Stride? Well, I take some of my other academic courses here or there. So I think you're going to see, my crystal ball is, when we talk about personalization, it's going to lead to a structural changes in how we have schools organized, funded, and what you're going to see is an incredible battle between the gatekeepers who want to keep those rules tight because that way they control their 20th century schools, and those that are saying we got to change in fundamental ways. So I think the change is not simply at the point of contact between student and teacher. I think it's changing the structure and how we organize and deliver education in this country.
No, that's pretty provocative stuff. Phil, can you top that?
I'm going to tap out right now. I don't think I can ever top either of my two co-panelists here. I'll give it a whirl though. So I think so data systems and the sort of aggregation of data at the district level, the state level, the federal level, the student level is going to become much more standardized and operationally relevant. Right now, there's a lot of data, right? It's just not super usable, right? And so I think that's one of the things. And I feel like we took a whack at it during Race to the Top when instructional improvement systems were kind of the thing of the day, which were similarly consuming data. But I feel like we're getting to a place where we know what to do with data systems. School districts, policymakers, leaders are taking it super seriously, and industry are providing tools to help make that happen. So I think data is going to, will be authoritative, accessible, and a key piece of all these systems moving forward. I also think that we will have policies that better support the resources necessary, particularly at the state level, providing school districts and departments of ed with the kinds of resources they need to maintain and support those data systems and the kinds of positions that school districts are going to need. And then finally, I think machine learning will sort of finally make its way substantially into education as really the game changer relative to personalized learning. We have to train those models, build those systems, and I think machine learning layered on top of that data with help from some policies is where we'll be.
Well, we got two more hours of topics right there in the past 5 minutes from Bill and Phil. But Nayoka, I'll leave you with the last word. What does your crystal ball look like for the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, and I'll try to be quick with the 3 minutes that we have, but I will piggyback on Bill and Phil. Online learning, I think, it's here to stay. I don't think that's going to change, whether it's a hybrid model or a fully online model. I think that online option and the way that we do things overall is going to change, but I think that that's also going to impact how we hire, right? So we're no longer looking for that teacher that can deliver instruction in the building, that face-to-face, you're looking for an edutainer. You need somebody that's going to be able to entertain students online. It's a very different platform. You're competing with the Wii and everything else, Call of Duty and everything else that's happening in your home. So teachers have to be educators. They have to be able to get students to come back and forth into the classroom. So I think the way that we hire is going to be different. And I think certifications are going to change as well. The way that teachers are certified, Bill talked about how there's all these strict rules. You have to be certified, certification is the same way, certified in your state by a specific grade level. I think all of that is going to change, especially with the hiring in the pandemic. It's hard to get teachers, but to be able to have teachers across states deliver lessons and instruction across states within districts and being able to share that resource, I think that that's going to change in the next few years as well.
Well, it's all great stuff, and really, just fodder for further conversations throughout the year. But I do see that our time is just about up, so I'm going to wrap things here. If you submitted a question that we didn't get to in the Q&A portion, someone will be following up with you directly to answer those questions. And I know there were several, which is an indication to the panelists about what a really intriguing conversation it was. So I'd like to thank all of our presenters today for this very informative presentation. And I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining as well. It was really, coming out of a conversation talking about the pandemic and feeling pretty good about looking at the future is a great thing. So as a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. Thanks again for participating and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.